Good afternoon. My name's Larry Forsyth. I'm the Senior Manager for WHS and HR from Australian Business Consulting and Solutions. Thanks for attending the webinar today on Transport and Freight Small Medium Enterprise. And the subject matter we're going to be looking at and some of the information that I'm going to be sharing with you today has been greatly appreciated and funded by the Department of Employment via the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, being ACCI. So we are very thankful for that. This has been a long engagement with this initiative. This is one of our last webinars for the transport and freight sector. We've also been delivering these funding packages to the aged care sector as well, which have been very successfully received. So it's just fantastic that we can deliver this webinar for you as participants today coming from the sector. The subject matter that we'll be focusing on, I'll be sharing with you and talking about today, is around recruitment and employee engagement, certainly around about performance management and understanding that and delivering on that, and then also driving strong WHS capability, which is absolutely important in this sector. So thinking about how we set up the initiative and some of the practices and strategies we put into place for the transport and freight providers, we developed a website, which is a screen print of what you can currently see under the Workplace Productivity Solutions initiative. And that website is available to you as participants today. So please, for further information, go to that. And what you'll be able to see there is the resources and the tools that we developed for the initiative. For you as providers in the transport and freight sector. And you can download those resources and tools immediately from the website, and you can start to use them or to match them with what you may or may not have in your workplace. But they're a great resource that were developed from a best practice perspective, and they can be used immediately. So you can customize them in your workplace, tailor them for you, and start to use them. I will touch on some of those today, and at the end of the webinar there is a slide just relating to those as well. So a great resource for you. Thinking about the transport industry issues, and as part of our research and putting the webinar and the program together, you probably would be aware it's an aging workforce right across Australia and across the globe. We're all working longer these days to pay off the mortgage, to build up the superannuation. And particularly in the transport sector, we're seeing older workers in this sense. Sometimes, and what we've identified as part of the research is that based on the transport industry and some of those issues, there's new entrants or a lack of new entrants coming into the industry. The sector is a little bit outdated from an image perspective and reputation and building that reputation perspective. And so well, we think about, which is quite amazing, part of the research, we identified that 45,000 trucks over 4.5 tonne come into the city of Sydney city alone on a daily basis. We were surprised that there is that lack of new entrants. And so therefore the competition is a little bit sort of stable, but then again, it's about how you actually do compete against other businesses as such. What we've also identified, and you'll certainly be aware, that customers are seeking faster service. So everyone wants something faster than just yesterday, and they want it delivered on time every time. And so again, competition is quite fierce. There's also the transport industry issue around turnover of staff. And so what we're seeing is, while the mining and that industry boom has declined somewhat, there still is that expectation from those people that have worked in those industries coming back into the transport sector, for example, that there's high-level benchmarks and best practice around that. So those people have experienced that, they're aware of that, and so when they come back into the industry, perhaps because of the decline in mining and the industry boom, there is an expectation around how you would manage that person coming in. We're also seeing increases in the amount of freight to be moved, caused by, even though it is ongoing and there's been some decline of the resources boom, and of course, particularly the growth of the online sales and how that's just it's a worldwide phenomenon. There's also the pressures from larger customers to reduce prices. My experience is working with a broad section of industry is that people want a good return on investment. They're following their due diligence. They're getting more than one quote, and so they're looking to negotiate and get a better price or as cheap as they possibly can. That doesn't necessarily mean to say that they'll always get the best quality outcome. And then there's the low operating margins within the sector. So in that sense, the margins of the past aren't exactly the same as what is currently happening. We've got logistics management. It's becoming more sophisticated with our distribution companies and our logistics organizations that we work with, based on new technology coming into play, and it is becoming more complex, sophisticated. We're all wearing more than one hat these days. We're looking at leaner strategies and how they can be applied and implemented, but in the same equation, trying to be sustainable and productive. So all of that results in that we need to continue to upskill our staff, our new staff coming into the market, and those staff for the future. And you would probably be aware, Australia's increasing population has led to more infrastructure, building activity generally, right across Australia. We're seeing that in the eastern states, particularly with the boom in real estate. So it's about how you transport your provisions into those environments. It's about how skilled you've got people on the ground and how quickly you can actually do that. Which leads me into the slide around engagement versus staff turnover. If you're not aware, there are actually reasons why people leave their job, and it's been bantered around, suggested that people will actually leave a manager before they leave an organization, and that can sometimes be due to a lack of promotional opportunity, because people are actually staying in the workforce for longer these days. It can be possibly from a poor relationship with the manager, and it can also possibly be about insufficient pay. So people move on for particular reasons, and so it's interesting to keep that in mind, particularly if you want to try to keep your people. How do you nurture them, encourage them, train them, continue to retain them, etc. So that leads then to how we improve our relationships and that retention matter of the staff that you want to keep in your business. So 3 of those most common interventions for improving retention are certainly around better induction processes. So I'm saying to you that if you don't have an induction process, and of course it has to be relevant to your organization, it has to be something that people use, and it has to be something that you're comfortable with using. You don't need a 10-page, 4-day induction process, but you need to have something in place. And so how you induct your people is obviously very important. It's that first impression. I mean, thinking about the whole employee life cycle, from advertising into recruitment, then into the induction, you want to have a common theme coming through. You want alignment with that, and people want to know that they're being inducted and they know what to do and how to do it. So that process from the very beginning is very important. That supports then improved employee communication, working with a cross-section and diverse section of the workforce. Many managers and organizations have said to me that it may be a different organization, but sometimes it's just the same thing that happens. And one of those big key factors is around communication. So it's interesting because we are all communicating all day, every day in our different modes, but we can continue to improve on how we communicate up and down and across our business. And then that last point there around better selection processes. So how do you actually select your people now? Is it ad hoc? Is it formalized? What are the strategies that you put in place? So it's about best practice, it's about good practice, but it's about actually having something in place that supports your organization and the comfortability of it to make it efficient in that way. Leading into job descriptions, and so again, the question is around, do you actually have a job description for the positions within your organization? If you don't have a job description, then it doesn't support you when you performance appraise a particular staff member. So from a recruitment perspective, it's really great to have a job description. And again, it doesn't need to be a 4 or 5 page long document. It can be a 1-pager or a 2-pager. We actually supply you with a job description template as one of the resources if you download from the website. And we've created that for you from a best practice perspective. So it's important to have that, and it supports the job role. It gives the employee a premise, a platform, a benchmark of some of the tasks and responsibilities. It also supports their learning and development and what they might need to do in the future in support of upskilling, in support of productive outcomes for the business. We would be suggesting around 8 to 12 tasks is ideal as a number to put on or write on the job description. It's not going to be quite a detailed task list per se. It's about then you would outline what that process was to do the job, and that becomes more of a say work method statement or a procedure in that sense. But ideally, it's good to have at least a list of tasks and responsibilities on the job description, again, to give that person some guidance and direction. As stated, if you don't have a job description, well, then it's very difficult to get that person to really properly commit to their accountability and what key performance indicators may need to be delivered and achieved as part of their success going forward. We've worked with organisations that didn't have them, and then they turned around, had us develop, we supported them through, and they actually saw quite a turnaround in productivity. Not a huge percentage, but any percentage of increase in productivity, I think, actually really counts. And as I said, it's hard to performance manage an employee if you don't have a job description. Thinking about wages and pays, obviously people come to work to get paid. People will come to work for different reasons, but predominantly it is about being paid for their mortgage, for their superannuation, but it's also about socialisation as well, a place of belonging and alignment with the organisation. What's really important, of course, is that you do pay your employees the right wage for that right particular person and that job role. So employees will be employed under an award, or an agreement, and a national wage minimum. So we're seeing some of that change actually just take place across the Australian landscape in the last 24 hours. And so thinking about where you might get support on that, we've got a slide there for you around that you can visit the Fair Work Ombudsman. The website there is as a link, and you can work out what the right wage is for that employee so that you make sure that you pay them the right wage. Many of our businesses that we've worked with have used this and find it actually a fantastic resource. So sharing that with you today. Moving into recruitment and interviewing techniques, obviously important, and as I mentioned, from the whole HR employee lifecycle perspective, when you advertise, when you recruit, when you induct, when you train, when you performance appraise your people, and even all the way through to if that person resigns or they are terminated, as an example, then that's really important. And so this is a systematic approach. So recruitment refers to the process of attracting, screening, and selecting the qualified people for a job. I know in the regions and even in the city, it's sometimes about the networks, who you know, the engagement, the relationships, particularly through social network premises these days and frameworks, and how people are recruited. And that will continue on. But a formal recruitment process and interviewing techniques, selection process is particularly important. It's good practice. And I'd be suggesting to you that you have that as part of your overall strategy, as part of the organisational vision, mission, values and behaviours, and that you actually document that the practice. I have worked with organisations that actually have undertaken recruitment processes and they've employed the friend of the friend who was the son of the uncle, and it doesn't always work out well. So I always suggest do it in a formal way, do it in a structured way, record and have that as part of the evidence. You wouldn't want to be in a position where a worker went to the Fair Work Commission and claimed unfair dismissal and you didn't have the documentation as evidence to back you up. Some of the stages of the recruitment include sourcing the candidate, obviously by advertising, screening potentials through using tests and or interviews. I wouldn't recommend using just one sort of one-off personality test. It would be a range of tools and strategies and frameworks that you would use as part of that recruitment process. But have behavioural questioning, scenario building questioning as part of that recruitment process, and that really supports looking right across the board and getting that candidate to sort of apply their skills and knowledge and capability to that recruitment process, so that you really are knowing that you get the right person at the right time and for the right reasons. So onboarding in that sense is to ensure the candidate is able to fulfill their new role effectively, and by following that process we will also provide you with a recruitment checklist, which again you can download from our website as part of good practice in recruitment and interviewing techniques. So sourcing candidates, and as you would be aware, social networks is absolutely phenomenal, I should say, right across the Australian landscape and globally. And so what we're seeing is that by using a social network part or an element as part of your recruitment, it certainly improves the reach. It's a little bit informal in the beginning, but that's okay because we can check people out about where they work, what they've said, who's recommended, etc. And this is another way that it's actually happening everywhere. And so I always say to people, well, be careful about what you do put on your social networks space and pages, etc. Obviously, you want to be open and honest around that too. But as the employer, you can certainly start to get an idea about how that person might fit into the business. And it might even be that you use that as that initial sort of a step into recruiting someone. Sourcing candidates, doing it online, you can actually have these outcomes where it can be low cost, a wider reach. Candidates can certainly have a view of your company, look at your website, and it's very, very portable because people can actually do that as they're traveling around on their mobiles, on their iPads, etc. And of course, Seek.com, known so well around Australia and internationally now, is another way of sourcing candidates from a social perspective. Some of the stats that we've identified as part of the research, we're seeing that LinkedIn and Facebook and even Twitter are right up there for recruiting people, looking out for people, searching for people. So if you're just doing a small ad or an ad in your local rag regionally, and that works for you, well then continue to do it. But you might be interested in looking at a wider circle of people. And that might be another way that you can actually be more effective and bring them into your space. When you're screening potential candidates from an interview perspective, and I touched on this before, I'd be suggesting that you have a set of verbal and non-verbal interactions or questions set up, and you can actually role play those, you can scenario build on those, and in that you can focus on gathering information to decide on the course of action. So when you might hire that person, what role they might take on. You of course want to try to identify through that process their skills and knowledge and capabilities, and obviously looking at their certification, insurances, all of that documentation that are going to make them a very viable candidate for your business. The types of interviews, and I think I've mentioned that, but of course phone calls, face-to-face interviews, video conferencing calls, Skype is particularly popular these days as some of that initial sort of interaction. And then it may or may not work in the sector, and recently I was in Ballina undertaking this program and delivering to quite a large group there from the transport sector, and talking about how group interviews as a strategy could work. And the group certainly took that on board as thinking outside the square, another way of actually placing a strategy around recruitment, sourcing candidates. I know, for example, and I know this because I was actually staying in the hotel at a particular time in the north just recently, where one of the big mining groups was actually doing group interviews at the hotel. And so they put it out to the larger community that they were in town, they were running interviews, and they were looking for particular people. And in that way, the group interview really did work for them. So again, even though we've seen a downcline in that sector, I know that it still is carrying on, and transport is certainly involved. The framework, the SOARA STAR model, is one that you may or may not have seen in the past, but it's actually a really nice framework to use. And it might be a way that you could insert that or integrate that into your position descriptions, into your behavioural interviewing, how people address selection criteria. It can be much more detailed, but it does enable the person to actually write out and clearly illustrate what they've done in the past. So what was that situation? What was the task that they had to undertake? What was the action or strategy they put in place? And what was the outcome or result of that particular project or demonstration? And that really gives a very clear indication to the panel, to you as an owner of the company, as a sole trader, about what that person's done, how successful they were at it, and then of course you can take that scenario into your face-to-face interview strategy if that's where you go. So open questions are obviously very important. Just the yes/no is a little bit closed. So you want to be able to give a case study, simulate it through. It enables the applicant to provide a real-life example, and it may give the right answer, or by giving the right answer doesn't necessarily mean to say that you'll choose that person, but then you can actually start to compare people around how they responded and how they can be the right fit for your business through that interview technique process. So onboarding or recruiting, it is the process of integrating new employees into the company, and in that way it's about all of that documentation, the forms, the induction, the orientation, how you train those people. And right from the very beginning, the people that you employ are starting to get a very, very good message and a strong message around collaboration, engagement, relationship building. And that really supports people within organizational settings in this day and age where it is complex. As I said, we're all wearing more than one hat. People want to be attracted, they want to be nurtured, they want to be trained and retained. And so all of this process is a part of that engagement and relationship building. Some of my experience in talking to people in different industries, and we're seeing that particularly with the younger generation around wanting to know that they're working in safe environments so that they can be at work safe and go home safe. And that's part of how they like to engage. They like to know that where they're working is a safe place, and they also need to know that they will be professionally managed and trained, and looking at sort of longevity in that sense. So that whole cycle of onboarding is particularly good practice. So to a contractor or an employee, who do you employ and how do you employ those people, under what award, under what agreement? So you would probably be aware, but we thought it was a relevant slide to include as part of this initiative. So an independent contractor is an entity, such as an individual, partnership, trust or company, that agrees to produce a designated result for the agreed price. We saw a huge change with the work health safety legislation from the start of 2012, where contractors and their documentation, their insurances was particularly important as part of best practice to have that on file and to know that those people had their licenses and insurances just in case worst case scenario happened and there was an incident or an accident. So it's particularly important that you classify your people correctly. Are they a contractor or are they an employee? So an independent contractor is free to accept or refuse work, is in a position to make a profit or loss, is paid for results achieved, provides all or most of the necessary materials, is free to delegate work to others depending on the terms and conditions of the contract you have with them, has freedom to a degree, and can provide services to the general public and other businesses. Thinking about contractors versus employee, and we've created a little bit of a list there for you. So there is a difference. Your employee would be under your insurances and terms and conditions, and the contractor as such on the left-hand side. So they have more control. They're a little bit more autonomous. There's more negotiation that takes place in that sense. But again, just reiterating and emphasizing the fact that as an employer, you may not have strong process and structures and evidence and documentation around this. So be very clear about that, and you can find further information from the website as mentioned. And then just a little bit more then around that contractor versus employee. So the employer legally has the responsibility for any work performed by the employee, and that person performs work personally and generally. They cannot subcontract that out, of course. In saying that, again, as a resource and a takeaway for you, we have provided you with a contractor induction checklist, and that is on the website. You can download that and start to use that immediately if you don't have one, or even compare it to the one that you have, and you might make some changes to yours, or by all means use ours. But it's particularly important, as I said, to make sure that your contractors and the documentation evidence around that is in place and that you've got that on file. And I would be always suggesting that you make sure that you complete a contractor induction checklist with all new contractors, and it might be something that you do on an annual basis as well to make sure that you've got the updated information. You wouldn't want to be left out and have a gap around that. Owner drivers. So owner drivers from the 1st of July 2011, and based on our research, owner drivers operating as sole traders or partnerships, and often referred to as natural persons, are deemed workers of their hirer, so of the courier or transport company they work for. So that's unless work cover determines that they are carrying on an independent business or trade. So again, a distinction there, and to be very clear around that from an owner driver contractor, employee perspective. Incorporated owner drivers. So incorporated owner drivers are not deemed workers of their hirer and are responsible for their own work cover injury insurance. And so in that sense, that might answer one of your questions, but very happy to field offline as well. But just some more information for you there about getting very clear around incorporating owner drivers, contractors, employees, etc. This all then leads to how you might develop your people. So what sort of learning and development do you have in place? Because remembering you've got skilled and unskilled workers coming into the workforce, how are you going to support those people? What we identified as part of our research, and you may or may not be aware through the GFC, we saw organisations, albeit quite large organisations, who had probably more funding around that, who actually continued to spend money based on their budgeting on learning and development for their staff, actually had a better outcome coming out of the other side of the GFC. What we've identified and thinking about being in the business for some time is that when budgets fall down, when there isn't enough money, it can be that HR element, a learning and development element, that is affected and impacted. But there are consequences from that. So ongoing learning and development is important. If you don't have a budget, I'd be suggesting that you certainly look at having that for the next financial year, because your people will need to be developed. They will need learning elements, be it technical and non-technical. And we're seeing particularly in the last probably 12 months or so, leadership programs. So not just your technical programs, etc., but people management programs, leadership programs have come back on the agenda. More in-house programs around that. Organisations can't necessarily send their people because they don't have the money or the budgets externally. And so we've been delivering on leadership programs right across the board, from executive right down to operational on the ground. So it's important to invest in your people, keep up to date with new information, have subscriptions, subscribe to networks and databases. In this way, it supports you to be more competitive in the marketplace. You know what's going on externally. Don't just be in a bubble around the business. And the business might be going well as well, but I would always be suggesting that you look outside in that sense too. It's going to help you to continue to be as competitive as you are now. Learning and development certainly keeps employees engaged and motivated, and from a Fair Work perspective, that's what the Ombudsman wants to see, and also promotes that harmonious, motivated workplaces are the most productive. And in that sense, it ensures that employees have the skills and knowledge to perform the job that's required within your business. Leading now into performance management and thinking about how you praise your people. Some of my research, some of my experience is that sometimes as managers we spend 80% of the time on the problem employee and 20% of the time on the high-performing employee. It doesn't seem fair. So there are problems to solve, there are people to work with, but it's also about how you operate with your people too. And so to be mindful of that, to be conscious of your tone of voice, your body language, and how you work with your people. Obviously, people come to work to do a good job. I don't think people come to work to do a bad job. And so ultimately, performance management is around creating those harmonious and productive workplaces, which is beneficial for both the organisation and the individual. So good performance, in essence, is around the work that's performed to the duties of the position and performs them to the standard required. It's about a standard, and why do you have those standards? Well, in that way, it actually sets a premise, a baseline for people to know where they actually stand and how they can actually increase and improve. It's also about compliance with workplace policies, rules, or procedures, and thinking about if you have a code of conduct in place, it's a very good practice thing to have. If you don't, then I would be highly recommending that. And in that sense, the code of conduct enables you to include referrals to your policies, rules, procedures, standards, regulations, etc. Good performance is also about acceptable behaviour in the workplace. So what's reasonable and what's not reasonable? What's unreasonable in the workplace? Most people know what good behaviour is, but it's certainly around that if people aren't behaving in line with the code, in line with the policies, based on the standards, then they need to be given feedback around that. And ultimately, as you probably agree, positive behaviour impacts on co-workers. So, for example, if someone's running late and they do it often and it's something that habitually is happening, well, then that's going to put a lot more pressure and challenge on their team. So how do you actually give people feedback around that? How do you manage that? It actually does happen. And so it's something that as a manager, you need to take into account from a performance perspective. And ultimately, in the end, it's about the work of getting the job done to the satisfaction of the employer, meeting those deadlines, achieving those outcomes, implementation, and getting along with people. But what's underperformance? Well, basically, underperformance is the opposite of what good performance is about. So it's the failure to perform the duties of the position or to perform them to the standard required. It can be that non-compliance around the policies, unacceptable behaviour in the workplace, and it can be disruptive or negative, some of those behaviours that impact on co-workers, be it running late, be it the tone of voice, be it the body language. We see that particularly from a bullying perspective around intimidation, embarrassment, and so that doesn't support people in their performance. It's about getting along with each other, being resilient, and collaborating with each other. This is what good performance is about, as well as the delivery of those technical tasks and responsibilities. But remember, underperformance is not the same as misconduct. So misconduct is actually a very serious behaviour such as theft or assault, which may warrant instant dismissal. But I'm suggesting to you as part of the webinar to be very careful with that, and before taking any action, then I would be suggesting that you seek advice about that specific case. But what I always say to managers is to document. And in that way, any inkling that you get, any uncomfortability that you get around a particular situation, it's good to actually write that down around, be it 12 o'clock on Thursday, this particular thing was said, I said, she said, he said, etc. And in that way, you've got a record, and if it comes back and that you need to draw on that, because I don't know about you, but I may not remember things that were said between a few people some weeks back, and it's good to have that written down. As I said, any inkling around that, and then from a misconduct perspective, it's about not treating people in a unreasonable, unjust, or harsh way. But it would be certainly a recommendation that you make sure that you take notes, that you have documents. But then it's also about taking legal advice if there was a serious situation. So some reasons for underperformance, it can be that the employees receive no feedback whatsoever. My experience is that people don't always ask for feedback, but then people don't always give feedback either. A simple thank you goes a long way. It doesn't mean to say that you're doing that all day, every day, but that respect as part of the values of the organisation and giving the feedback is certainly a very good thing to do. Another reason could be about the mismatch between the employee's capabilities and the job expectations. It can be that it lowers employees' morale. There might be some personal issues going on in the employee's family situation. There might even be drug and alcohol issues. And so a question there is, do you actually have a drug and alcohol policy within your organisation? We're seeing a lot more industry, particularly from this sector, undertake drug and alcohol testing and applying that to their workplaces today. And then there can be the possibility of cultural misunderstandings, and we run cultural awareness training around these sorts of elements in support of, in that we're looking to continually employ such diverse workforces these days in support of greater and better outcomes, and then workplace bullying. So these are a lot of reasons why people underperform, and if you've never thought about them before, it's something to reflect on and take into consideration. So moving into feedback, well, if you don't do it, then why not? It's probably something to start to think about, to start to implement. A culture of feedback within an organisation is a very, very positive thing to do. Marshall Goldsmith coined the term feed forward, and so feedback is around the past, but feed forward is around the future and how you'd like that person to actually perform in the future. So it can be a very positive element to put in place. It doesn't mean to say that you actually do not give feedback anymore, but to combine both feedback and feed forward, again, is a positive thing. When you are providing that feedback, be clear about what you want to say. It supports the employee about the way that they're actually operating and what they will do in the future. And it does really help build rapport and trust with your employees too. We are all human beings. We like to get feedback. We like to get positive strokes. And so if you don't have feedback happening in your workplace, then think seriously around it. As you actually undertake feedback and implement that within your cultures and your business, it's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And when you give feedback, I would be suggesting be brief, be patient, be sensitive around that, be mindful and conscious of that tone of voice and that body language that you use. Thinking about and remembering that body language is actually an outward display of your emotions internally. And so if you're feeling anxious around giving that feedback, you don't want your body language to actually demonstrate that. So breathe, be careful around what you say and how you say it, practice it. It's not something that you can change and do overnight if you haven't got that happening in your workplace now. So you want to give feedback based on the past behavior, not the person, so the past performance. You're certainly not giving the person feedback about who they are or what they look like, and be specific. Avoid general comments and don't assume. Make sure you get the correct information, and that might take some time. But there's always, two stories to a situation. Moving into termination of employment, and I talked about that. Any of that termination or how you work with your employees around that must not be harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. From a fair work or fair treatment perspective, then it's about trying to integrate that into your performance appraisal framework, so you make sure that you are fair to your people, that you're honest, and that you're open about that. And closing out on that cycle, I would always be suggesting that you have a termination checklist, you have a termination survey, and trying to use the feedback that's provided to you from the employee if they have resigned and they are leaving the business back into your continuous improvement cycle, and how you might improve for the future as a part of productivity moving forward, as part of your competition and productivity and sustainability. So in that sense, if the employee has worked for the business for 12 months to make an unfair dismissal claim, but make sure you keep good records and documents around that as well. And if it did go to a court of law, a tribunal, then the judge may ask you to provide that evidence, to provide the documentation, and you would need to bring to the attention table right from the very beginning how you actually inducted the person, recruited, inducted, how you trained them, how you performance managed them if the case needed to be put in place, how you appraised them, and what sort of feedback you gave them, and that was recorded. So if a small business employer follows the Small Business Fair Dismissal Code, and you can see that under that website, and the dismissal is not harsh, unjust, or unreasonable, then the dismissal may be deemed to be fair. But we would be suggesting that you use the Small Business Fair Dismissal Code checklist, and certainly keep it with your records. And please refer to the termination checklist as one of the resources that we've provided for you as part of this fantastic initiative. Moving now into health and safety responsibilities and building that capability, you may or may not be aware that under the new Health and Safety Act from 2011, there were some responsibilities that as the person conducting a business or undertaking, you certainly need to take into account. You need to start to understand, and you need to start to implement these within your workplace. So the PCBU is the acronym that is now being used. Workers are known as workers, not employees anymore, but all workers, be it employees, contractors, subcontractors, trainees, apprentices, volunteers, are classified as a worker. And in that sense, it is everyone's responsibility. From a duties of officer perspective, so be it the managing director, CEO, board member, chair, etc., you are classified as an officer under the Corporations Act. And so part of your role is to actually monitor, to make informed decisions around how you actually implement health and safety in your workplace, how you manage risk, and I'd be suggesting to you, have you identified who your officers are? So if you're the owner of the company is the PCBU, and you are an officer of that business. So workers' responsibilities from an employee, contractor, subcontractor perspective, then you must take reasonable care of health and safety. Again, it's work safe, home safe, and it's everyone's responsibility. And that you conduct things in a fair and open and honest manner. You don't want to adversely affect others. You don't want to put yourself at risk, put others in trouble. So you must follow instructions so far as reasonably able to do so, and you must cooperate with reasonable notified policies and procedures. So I'm always suggesting to employees that they have a list of policies, that people sign off on those policies, they know where to access them. It's based on the policy and procedure under the Health and Safety Act and mitigating that risk in the workplace. Now, we know that not everyone will read every single word in all of those policies, but it's about that they do sign off, that they know where they are, they know how to access them, and they understand that there are actually policies in place as part of their responsibility. Then just reiterating and reinforcing the PCBU, so you must ensure, so as far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety of work is engaged or caused to be engaged by the person. And workers whose activities are carried out at work are influenced or directed by that person, the PCBU or the business, while the workers are at work in the business or undertaking, and other persons are not put at risk in that sense. So again, it's about identifying the risk, how you manage the risk, that you look after the risk yourself, and that you consult and collaborate with others within the business to ensure that you conduct it in a reasonably practicable way and from a due diligence perspective. Just a nice slide there around the PCBU duties, so all the way from the top of safe plant and equipment through to instruction, facilities, resources, providing safe work environments, safe systems of work. So have a systematic approach and make sure that you monitor what's going on and that you are aware and that you understand. Going to court and saying that you weren't aware or you didn't know probably won't stand up. If you haven't got good health and safety, then you probably haven't got good performance. So poor risk management practices, of which work health safety is a significant one, can lead to significant direct or indirect costs. And here's a little bit of a list for that. So the main direct cost is workers' compensation claims. And we saw a third of compensated fatalities, I should say, excuse me, I need a drink of water, in Australia are due to a vertical or a vehicle accident. Excuse me. Transport and storage industry has the highest incidence, so 2 by national rate and fatalities and 4 by national average rates of industries are some of the stats that we had collected. And then all industries, some of that median payment for some of the serious claims rose by 44% financial year through to 09, which was significant. So what we're suggesting to you is to make sure that you've got a claims process in place, that you are having that reviewed. It might mean that you need to have that audited, and part of that could be around auditing your premiums, your payments, and those sorts of things too. So we can support you with that as well. But make sure that that impact on you, the cost of that, is actually something that you look at and refer to make sure that you're not overpaying and that you've got the right processes in place around that as well. Some of those indirect costs that we don't always take into consideration, it might be a temporary shutdown, lower productivity, brand damage, reputation, and even right down into repairs or replacements of damaged equipment and vehicles. So it's hard to actually put a cost on these things from a productivity perspective, but if you haven't got good health and safety systems, processes and procedures in place, then these can be some of the indirect costs, and then how does that support you going forward as part of the competition in the marketplace? Some of the indirect costs, some of the negative impacts on staff engagement are these elements here, which have a huge impact on your staff. And I've heard managers say, and it's been bantered around, that people are our greatest asset. So if we don't look after our people, if we don't have strong health and safety systems in place, it can lower morale, productivity, culture, and move into even absenteeism, presenteeism, and staff turnover, which creates a higher cost. I certainly heard that it can be something like $20,000 to bring in a new employee, $20,000 to train them and retain them, and then unfortunately if they decide to leave, it can be another $20,000, because then you're going back into the cycle of trying to look for someone, find someone again. So as well as the remuneration, it's a very expensive process and a huge cost to the business if you don't have strong health and safety capability in place. So effective workplace consultation and risk management strategies are essential, particularly from an organisational perspective. And I know in the industry and talking to people as part of the data collection and putting the process and initiative together, that sometimes these processes can be ad hoc, but it's very important that you have really robust and rigorous process and procedures, documentation in place around this. It's part of the law, it's part of your capability demonstration. What we've seen as part of our research, and you'll be familiar with this to an extent, is fatigue in the workplace, and particularly in the transport and road and freight industry. And here are some elements that you can see around what is fatigue. So everyone's working longer, harder, longer shifts, trying to stay awake, do the work. So these are things that you need to think about. Plan the trip, plan your stops, and manage the fatigue. If you don't have a fatigue management policy in place, a checklist around that, we've provided you with that as part of our resources. So I would urge you to certainly have a look at that, download it, compare it to what you've got, and then how you actually manage that in your workplace. And so remember, under the chain of responsibility provisions, it's important from a health and safety law perspective that you do have a fatigue management framework, process, procedure in place. It's very supportive, it is a requirement, and it's something that I urge you to start to put in place if you don't have it, or to at least review what you have got in place. From an incident perspective, well, it can happen absolutely anywhere, and you wouldn't want it resulting in a death or an injury. If it was to happen, it must be reported. It must be reported to your regulator and obviously to the PCBU or who is in control, and it must be investigated. Recently, working with an organisation that had an incident, they had large contracts. It was a disastrous outcome. It wasn't recorded. They were fined. They lost some of their contracts, so the impact and the outcome was not a positive one. And basically, they just didn't have a systematic approach in place. So again, I urge you to make sure that based on that incidents can happen anywhere, that you've got a strong framework in place there. So the fatigue regulated heavy vehicle from that perspective, so a regulated heavy vehicle is a gross vehicle mass greater than the 12-tonne or a combination. So as a driver, you must not drive fatigued. You must comply with the standard hours of work. You must keep a work diary. From the 10th of August 2014, you must use the new National Heavy Vehicle Registration National Driver Work Diary in New South Wales. You can purchase that as such. And then respond to changes in the circumstances, such as delays, and report these to the operator or the PCBU. So this is part of your role in the fatigue-related or regulated heavy vehicle space. Then transporting of dangerous goods. This doesn't relate to everyone, but as a driver transporting dangerous goods, you must follow the following in that the licensed vehicle, when transporting more than 500 litres of dangerous goods in any single receptacle, or it contains more than 500 kilograms of dangerous goods, I should say, then you need to make sure that you must continue to record that and have that on file. Ensure the dangerous goods you are carrying or pick up from a client are compatible for transport as such, and you must record that and communicate that too. You must check packaging for any damage or defects. Do not transport if packaging is not intact and secure. And correct loading of goods in the vehicle is obviously important. And then avoid heavy populated areas. You'd probably be aware that dangerous goods vehicles are prohibited from travelling in Sydney tunnels. So if you are transporting DG, then please take these into account. So as a driver transporting dangerous goods, you must do the following. Ensure you have the transport documents with you. Check you have the correct placarding. An emergency procedure guide must be carried. Have a first aid kit in the vehicle. Ensure you have the right safety equipment when transporting a placard load. And this includes the following: fire extinguishers, 3 double-sided reflector triangles, personal protective and specific safety equipment, I should say. So quite a list. It's a very good resource. If you weren't aware, do your research, do your reviews, make sure that you've got this in place under the transport of DGs for vehicles. Again, there, just to reiterate the dangerous goods incident situation, so who to notify, and the driver responsibilities on the right-hand side as part of the work that you do. And there's a support service for transport workers there, the 1300 number. So again, share that with your team. If you're a sole driver, sole trader in that way, then you need to adhere to the DG incident listing. You need to make sure you've got, again, a systematic process in place around that and strong policies and procedures. This is the law. Which moves me really into my checklist. It's not the complete list. It was only what we could fill in on that particular slide. The fatigue management checklist, a bullying assessment, stress, particularly a vehicle safety inspection checklist will be a great resource for you, and a workplace inspection checklist. I think from memory there's around about 15 documents, templates and checklists that we've provided as part of the funding, which has been absolutely fantastic as part of the resource. So please download them, please use them, please refer to them, share them, compare them to what you've got, and in that way it's going to support you as a resource mechanism in creating more sustainable, productive transport and freight SME. A list of resources for you that you can go to do more research for your information. Great websites as part of our research and putting it together. So I'd like to thank you for your attendance and your participation. It's been a great initiative, and good luck for the future. Thank you so much.